if you're experiencing these things and you haven't told anybody, like, tell somebody, like, tell me, like, I will help anybody. If anybody messages me, like, follow my Instagram and DM me on Instagram, like, talk to me, like, I want to directly help anybody who needs it. Or if you just want to like talk and rant and tell me about your experience or something, like, I also have Marco Polo, you can just like chat with me on there. I would talk to anybody. All right, so I don't want to have a super long intro. If you saw the title of today's video, obviously know we're talking about some deep traumatic stuff today, but I just thought I would start out by sharing my story and giving maybe some advice and stuff from each of us, or me who has experienced stuff like this, and then Colin who wasn't raised around anything like this, never experienced it firsthand, never really knew anybody who experienced stuff like this. Right. So when we got together, his mind was opened to a lot of new things that he had never thought about, and so we'll talk about that stuff too. But yeah, I'm nervous. I'm really an open book. I'm happy to talk about stuff like this, especially if it can help anybody else and make anyone else feel that they're not alone in the things that they deal with, or, you know, open your mind if it's something that you've never really heard about before or never really knew anybody firsthand who's experienced these things. It could maybe help you, especially as a parent. I think there's a lot that we can do as parents to just be a little bit more cautious with a lot of the just dangerous predators and stuff like that. Colin and I are both getting over colds, so might hear some sniffles and coughs and stuff like that. But yeah, so basically from the time I was about 2 years old until I was 12, I was sexually assaulted by the same person throughout those 10 years. And my parents didn't know about it at all. The way that it went down was always, you know, behind closed doors and while, you know, my parents weren't around, and really I don't have any blame. I don't put any blame on my parents at all for not knowing that this was going on, because it was done in a very, very like particular way where I know that there's no way they could have known. So I'm hoping that with sharing these things that it can help, you know, other parents. I'm hoping it can help a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, but specifically I'd love to be able to help other parents to be able to know what kind of things to look out for. And, you know, because I know that my parents, there wasn't really anything that they could have seen to know certain things. I want to be able to share certain things that we can do to avoid those things, to keep those things from happening. Look, you know, keeping doors open and kids not sharing bedrooms and stuff like that. And, you know, I'm very against sleepovers and all that jazz. So we'll get into all of that more. But so for those 10 years, from the time I was 2 until 12, it was the same person. During that time, there was another guy who was doing the same things to me. Probably, if I had to guess, I was between the ages of like 4 and 6. It might have gone a little bit past that as well, but basically after school, when it was in like preschool and kindergarten and elementary school, we had a friend from our church who would pick me up after school, and I would stay at her house until my parents were done with work and were able to come and pick me up. And during my nap time while I was there, I would oftentimes wake up with the woman who would pick me up. It was one of her sons. She had a few kids, but one of her sons, I would wake up with him like on top of me in the bed. And with me being so young and already experiencing stuff like this from another person, I just kind of did the same thing that I always did, where I just kind of mentally just shut down and would just let happen what was happening, and I just knew that it would be over. And yeah, it's kind of hard to talk about like what I felt or what I knew because I was so little. Like, I don't exactly know how I knew from the beginning that it was wrong and that I couldn't tell people. At least from when I was like younger.
Yeah.
I don't remember why I knew that or what was maybe said to me. As I got older, I remember being told, you know, like I could go to jail, like you can't tell people, stuff like that. And then having grown up in a very religious household, we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons, and we're still members. We were both born and raised in the church, and you know, we obviously learned a lot about chastity and saving ourselves till we're married. And even though I was never initiating anything, you know, that this was just stuff that was happening to me for a long time, there was always kind of like something in the back of my head that made me think that I would also get in trouble if people found out. So that was something that had me holding on to it for a while because I didn't want to get in trouble. I also thought that I could get in a little bit of trouble like with the church too. Sometimes there can be like some slight disciplinary type of actions when you cross certain lines that are pretty big. And breaking the law of chastity is like a really big thing where, you know, there's a whole process of, you know, repenting, being sorry for what you did and trying to be better. It's a bigger process than it would be like, I don't know,
something else.
Something smaller, because it's just like a bigger thing. And anybody who is in a super religious household, I feel like most religions talk a lot about like saving yourself for marriage and stuff like that. I think our church specifically is very, very,
very
strong. And then when it comes to a lot of other like Christian households, I have tons of friends who are Christians but not members of our church, where we have like all of the same beliefs and like we have so much more in our church that a lot of other Christian churches do not believe or know about. But I feel like for the most part, in a lot of other Christian churches, like we believe the majority of what they all believe too. Like I listen to a lot of like Christian like pastors and stuff who stream their stuff on like YouTube on every Sunday. Like I love them, and they all talk about stuff that we believe in, and you know, I can easily feel the spirit in those things. Anyway, I'm starting to go down a whole rant of like stuff with the church, but basically I just thought that I could potentially be in some trouble. And so I was really nervous about that. This same person who was doing these things to me for that 10-year period from 2 to 12 also had a pornography problem. And so I would see things that he would watch. And I remember there were times where people who were his parents found out about his difficulties with pornography, and in trying to help him to stop, anytime that they would leave the home and he would be unattended, they would actually lock him outside or make like he would have to go somewhere else, do other things. He never had like a cell phone. Like they did try their best to like make it difficult for him to access it. But if I was ever around or anything, like there had been times where I like would squiggle a mouse on a computer that he was using, and because the screen is like black, I'd like squiggle the mouse and stuff would like come up on the computer that he had been looking at. And I don't know specifically, but I know that there was a time where I was like, we were all in the same place and his parents left and I was in the home that they had left. I was there and I remember asking him why he was outside because they didn't know. Like, I remember I actually felt a little bit safer that he had to be outside, knowing that like everybody else was gone and he was outside. I remember being like more comfortable
Yeah.
actually alone in the house without him there. But I was wondering why he was out there, and he was just kind of giving like little responses. Like, I was just like, I'm just in trouble. And you kind of say like, don't look at the computer. Like, don't look at it. And would just kind of like say things that almost felt intentionally like, if you want to know, just like go look at the computer, but was like saying don't look at it. I don't know how to explain it, but and it was animated pornography, what they call it, like hentai or something like that. I don't know, it was some type of like anime stuff. And so for me, to this day, anime content is difficult to look at because it immediately reminds me of the times that I had seen.
Kind of brings back that trauma a little bit.
Yeah, and because it's not even just about having seen the pornography in the first place, it brings up like those negative emotions and situations connected to that person. So where to this day, I actually have a good relationship with this person, which is really surprising for a lot of people. But this person was also another like child. Like I talked about how like his parents were trying to help him from like his problems with like pornography and stuff. Like, so he was also a child. We were both children. And this person was actually being sexually molested himself in other places. When he would take the school bus to school, and at school there were other people who were molesting him. Yeah. And that's where he had learned it. And so him also being a child, that happening, him learning it, trying the stuff on me, and it be building to an addiction, and then eventually him hitting puberty, and it gets worse. Yeah. And I'm getting older, and like as we're both getting older, then like more in-depth things can happen. Yeah. So it just progressively got worse over the years, and that addiction was built that way. And I remember seeing this person as two people. So there was the person that, you know, when I could feel that presence was there, my heart was racing more. If I knew that something was probably going to happen, like stuff like
anxiety and fear.
Yeah. But then when that person wasn't there, there was another person, and he was like the life of the party, and everybody wanted to be his friend. Everybody knew who he was, and he always included me, made me feel like if I ever felt excluded or hurt from anybody, if anybody ever hurt my feelings, like he was always one to like stand up and be there. And so I had a lot of like comfort in that side of who he was. And yeah, it was really interesting. So by the time I was 12, I had found out that this person had also been hurting a family member of mine. And that is where like I drew the line. I remember that day I was just like sobbing my eyes out, crying, like, because I just felt the spirit so strongly that I needed to tell somebody. And anybody who's like religious, even if you're not religious, is just like that, your intuition, like just feeling like, you know, when you're pulled in like a certain direction, and you just like feel like there's something like telling you to do this or that. That's what I mean when I say I'm like feeling the spirit. And I just knew that I had to say something, and I didn't know what to say. I was scared that this person was going to go to jail because of the good side. I knew that the good side didn't like that bad side of himself either. Like, I knew that was something that he was also battling with himself. And that good side, I loved him. Like, and not in love, but
As a person,
yeah. And it was just kind of like, there were two personalities there. But I knew, like, you know, now it's no longer just me. Now I know that it's happening to someone in my family whom I love. And so it was like, I have to tell somebody. And it took me hours and hours and hours of just sobbing my eyes out, And my sister came over with her husband at the time, and my mom had come home from work at that point, and all these people are here, and they just see I'm like hyperventilating, and I'm crying and crying and crying, and I can't get it out, like what I'm trying to talk about, what I'm wanting to say, because it was so scary and hard. And I did wonder a little bit if I might get in trouble. At this point, I knew that I wouldn't get in trouble with the law. At least I was pretty sure, but I still wondered if I was going to get in trouble like with the church in some way, because it was really confusing at a young age. It's hard, but
stuff like that's happening to you at that age is gotta be so hard to process on its own, and then tying in like these religious beliefs that you've had and trying to figure out like where that falls. Like obviously being a victim of sexual abuse, like you're not going to be in trouble with any like real religious authority, but as a kid when you're that young, it's going to be hard to know like, did I do anything wrong? So I definitely understand like where you're coming with that.
Yeah. So there was a certain point where when my sister had come over with her husband, they also had their 2 dogs with them. And they said, hey, we're going to take our dogs to the dog park. Do you want to come in with us? Because they obviously knew I was in distress, and they wanted to figure out how to help me because they love me. And so they're like, let's just take her outside. Let's like let her get some fresh air, breathe, like cry it out if she needs to, and maybe feeling like she's not like trapped in the house with all these people can help her to get out whatever she's trying to say. And it really did take a long time. My sister's husband at this time, he was working in a field where he helped troubled teens who were dealing, victims of abuse, or people who just like make a lot of bad decisions, need help in school, like just troubled teens. There's all different types of troubled teens. And that was his job. He would go into their homes, he would hang out with them sometimes he would like talk with them, almost like therapy kind of thing, even though he wasn't a therapist, but he might help them with homework. That was just his job. So he was really good at talking to teenagers and preteens and making them feel comfortable. And so he had actually come over and sat on a bench next to me while we're at the dog park, and I don't remember a lot of what he said, but I remember feeling very comfortable. He was able to like ease my anxiety, bring me down, and I finally opened up and told him what had happened. And I remember he had a couple like follow-up questions that I answered. I don't remember a lot of specifics, but he got up and he ended up going over and telling my sister about it. And I stayed at the bench. I just kind of saw from a distance that he was talking to her. I remember she was like very subtly, slightly offended that she wasn't able to get it out of me, but her husband was. But I think she was it was like a joking way, like, oh, you can't tell me. I don't know. Anyway, that's not an important part of the story. But yeah, so they did that. We got in the car, we drove back to my house, and my mom got home, and my sister went up and told my mom everything. I remember at a certain point, someone took me into our pantry. We had like a walk-in pantry at this house. Someone took me into this pantry and said like that this person who had done these things to me was like horrible and evil, and that I needed to hate them. Like, you need to hate them, were like the words that came out of this person's mouth. They were like, you need to hate them. Like, you were not connected to them ever again. This is disgusting. Like, it was very, very, like, affected this person in a really bad way. And this person has also been a victim of sexual abuse in the past. And so she was still at that time really having a hard time with it. So when she was telling me these things, I was like, I remember being like uncomfortable because I was like, I don't hate this person. I was so confused. Anyway, then we ended up going upstairs, and my mom talked to me for a little bit. She had a couple questions, and then she called my dad, who was at work at the time, to tell him everything that she just found out. And so he immediately got someone to cover his shift, and he's a fireman. And if you have anybody in your life who's a fireman, you know their schedules are kind of different from a lot of people. Typically, there's a few different kinds, but a very common one that my dad was on was you work for 48 hours and then you have 4 days off of work. So, and I think that might still be his schedule to this day, and now he's the chief of the fire department in, I think it's like in the county or something, I don't know. But yeah, it's pretty difficult to be able to, like, you really have to just like call somebody up, another like person who's obviously a fireman and works in that like department. He has to call somebody who's not working and ask if they could come in immediately. And so that's not a super easy thing to do. I'm sure like if you're a nurse or a doctor, I'm sure it's very similar. Like if you, obviously somebody has to take your place, because this could be a really life or death kind of job sometimes for people. And so, but he got somebody immediately. I think he just said that there was an emergency. I don't know exactly, but I knew he was coming home, and he had never ever done that before. I had never seen him leave work early for like any reason. And I remember getting scared that my dad was going to hurt this person. I was scared that he was going to leave work and go to this person and hurt him, like physically. That was my fear, because there was a time, and I've actually talked to my dad personally about this before, but there was a time where I told my dad that this person had hurt me, but it wasn't a sexual thing. It was, I think it was physical. Like he had gotten mad once, and I don't know if he threw something at me or he like punched me or something, but I told my dad that this person had done that. And I remember following my dad, and my dad had like thrown him against like a wall and was kind of like holding his neck or holding his arm up to his neck or something, and was saying that if he ever like laid his hands on me, that he would like kill him. And like my dad and I have talked about this to this day. Like my dad, he's one of those like guys who like never ever cries. Like you hear like, oh, my dad, like I remember this one time he cried. Like that's kind of how he is. And I remember him crying when he heard that that was something that he had done and said that prevented me from saying things. That was really a difficult thing for him that he had to work through too. And I feel really guilty about the fact that he felt that way, because I know that that was never his intention. He's just trying to protect his daughter. Like he found out somebody like hurt my daughter, and he's just like, don't touch her, like, or I'll kill you. Like
that's a very protective in nature, and so something, especially like the severity or the seriousness of the issue, like you could say like if the reaction might be like very I don't know, like equally serious or blunt or like an overreaction, but in reality it's just like sometimes the nature of a father protecting his kids will just like push them to like the extreme to make sure that like nothing serious is going to happen again, or that it stops. So yeah, I definitely see that.
Excuse me. Yeah, so yeah, I never intentionally meant to like put blame on him for that situation, because I mean ultimately I'm the one who just like took that information and did what I was going to do with it. Like it's really not his fault. But I remember him doing that, and so I was like, so when I knew my dad was coming home from work, I thought about this one instance where he had said, you know, if you ever touch her, like, I'll kill you. And I knew he was coming home and he was going to be upset that this was happening. And I got really scared that he was going to find him and do something. And so I was like, I need to leave. And so my sister actually just like let me get in the car with her, and we went to the mall in our area, and we just like walked around and talked. And I remember I had like a couple like really personal, private questions about sex. I remember while I was there, because now that I had finally said something and I could talk to somebody who knew what all of that was, there were certain like actual medical problems and things that I was experiencing that I had always wondered if they were happening because like I was having sex at like this little age, you know? And so I mean, I remember being like, is it normal, like, if after, like, it burns when you pee? Like, really personal, like, I remember having tons of questions, and I would get UTIs all the time, and so I would just, like, ask her that, and then I remember, like, when I was asking her these things, it kind of felt like she was a little uncomfortable, and looking back now, it was probably just, like, she was so sad that I had to ask these things, and then I was, like, I'm sure it was just,
at that
like,
age, especially.
Yeah, I'm sure she was just, like, I can't believe that she even has to, like, ask me these things and that she's experiencing this. I'm sure that that's what was going on. But I remember picking up an uncomfortable vibe, and so I kind of backed off and stopped asking questions. But by the time I got back home, there were, like, a bunch of cop cars in front of our house, and we had gone inside. And I remember there being, like, cops in the house, and I was, like, scared. I knew I was gonna see, like, this person, and, like, I had just told on them, basically, and I remember just kind of, like, walking in fast, and I didn't want to see him, and I went to go and, like, hid in my room or something, but a cop did have to come talk to me for a little bit, and I don't remember anything about it. I mean, I'm sure they asked me, like, what happened, kind of thing.
Questions, yeah.
But it wasn't super in-depth or long because this person admitted to everything. And so they didn't need to ask me, like, too much because they weren't trying to figure out who, like, a he said, she said kind of situation, because he was just admitting to all of it. So I remember there was, like, court that took place, and I was allowed to go, but I also didn't have to, and I didn't want to because I was scared to see this person again, like, because like I said, the part of this person whom I loved, I didn't want to see them because I had just tattled, basically.
Yeah.
Which is really sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, they gave him, like, a piece of paper or something, and they said to write down everything that you did. And he wrote everything down and he gave it to them, and there was so much more than even I knew. And I found out that he was also hurting other people in my family, and that I was just, like, completely shocked. I had no idea. And I didn't read this paper. My parents just told me about it, I'm pretty sure. But I remember I didn't have to go to school the next day because it was a really late night with everybody being up. And I remember, like, doing my chores as always. I remember, like, sweeping the floors when my mom came in and she had, like, some questions. And everybody was kind of start treating me really, like, nice and sweet because everybody just found out that this had been happening to me. But for me, nothing, like, the thing that was different was that, like, there was now, I knew that this person was in jail, and that was, like, weird and confusing. Like, I knew I wasn't going to see them anymore, where I was used to seeing them quite a bit. And there was a part of me that was sad because of the good parts of who he was, and because he was always somebody to make me feel included. And as a little kid, like, it's really easy to feel excluded from things, and, like, people tell you, like, oh no, this game is for adults, or, like, go play with the kids, or go sit with the kids. And I always wanted to sit with the adults. I've always been drawn and attracted to people who are older than me in all ways. Friendships, like, people who I was, like, attracted to physically, or just people that I wanted to be around. My whole life has always been just, like, an older group. So I never wanted to sit with the kids, and I never wanted to, like, and it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I just wanted to grow up already, because I definitely experienced stuff like that in high school when you just, like, want to be an adult kind of thing. But it was more so just, like, those were just the people that I wanted to be around more. It had nothing to do with me wanting to be older until people would tell me, like, that you're not invited, basically, because you're too little. Which makes sense, like, when there's going to be adult conversations and adult things going on, like, you don't want, like, this little girl in there with you. But when they're just told, when you're just, like, you're just too little, it made me wish I was older and, like, feel like being little is not fun. And Yeah, kind of weird. But he was on, anyway, this person was always one to be like, no, like she could come, and like would always like introduce me to everybody that was around, and yeah. So I had like a fear that without having that anymore, that people weren't going to include me and that I was going to be kind of shut out again, which could essentially just be a middle child syndrome. Honestly, just like feeling like that. But anyway, all of that went on. And then during that time, the person who, my sister's husband at the time, so my brother-in-law, he was someone who I ended up confiding in on a regular basis because I learned really quickly through him helping me get out the initial information, the initial like shock factor information for everybody. He was the one who was able to get it out of me, and I learned that he was very comfortable to talk to, and that I felt very safe talking with him, and that I knew that he was going to do things to try and like help me. And over a period of time, he had kind of been like grooming me, I guess is probably the word. And I didn't know it at the time, but I remember being very flattered by the way he would talk to me a lot. And there was a lot of like inappropriate touching that could be deemed like playful like for a lot of people. Like he would smack my butt all the time. But even in front of everybody, and he did it to other people too, I think. But there were a lot of like things where it's like, that's not really appropriate. Like looking back, it's like he was a full grown adult who was married and I was a child. And so I was, when I initially gave the information, I was 12. I was about to turn 13, so it was really close to the 13 mark. And so this had kind of been happening during that time. And there were some small situations too with like boys in high school who, during this time, part of it was middle school actually, where I actually it's really hard to like look back and think on. A part of me feels like I remember like allowing these things to happen, but I don't know if it was like these things were happening and I didn't say or do anything. Like that's been like a really confusing, like repetitive thing across like all of my experiences, is not really saying no and just kind of like shutting down and letting things happen, which can make feeling like whether something was your fault or if like, does this count as abuse if I didn't say anything? That's been like a really confusing, repetitive factor. But there were a lot of boys in middle school during this time after this person had gone to jail where rumors started spreading that, I just like have sex with people basically. And there was also a rumor going around that I was like gangbanged by like all of these different people, and a lot of people were like laughing at me about it. Like there were people who legitimately believed that I was gangbanged by a bunch of people in high school, like while I was in middle school, and they would like point and laugh at me about it. And then there were like boys who were hearing that like, oh, I have like sex with people. And then I remember that rumor specifically starting to make me feel like I was kind of cool because of TV. The way TV would portray like someone in high school where like, oh, this is like the school slut or something, and she was always so hot and so pretty and everybody wanted to be with her kind of thing. And I felt like people were giving me that reputation,
attention,
and then I liked it. I was getting that attention. And so with things that had happened there, I never did anything to anybody, but people did things to me and I didn't say or do anything. But it's also other kids my age. Yeah. So I don't know, that was a really confusing like middle process, but I would share these things with my brother-in-law and he would help me through them. There were a lot of times I kind of started experiencing depression and a lot of guilt. And I actually started lying to people, and I started making up stories about like sexual experiences that I would have with people that didn't actually happen. And that kind of ties into the whole like reputation thing. Then I wanted to like uphold that because it gave me so much attention, that I started telling people like, oh, I did this or I did that, and it was not true at all. And so I started, developing a lot of depression from that, and that I was feeling very like guilty. And then you learn that, when you start lying and making up stories, it's going to turn into more lies because more people are going to have questions, and it turns into a lot more. And I also had someone accuse me of being in love with my abuser because I missed them. I missed the good side of them that I've talked about, and I missed feeling like I was included in things, and I missed feeling like there was somebody who wanted to hang out with me, where I didn't think I was really had that anymore. And so I was missing that. And there's someone who didn't quite understand that, and they thought I was just missing them as a whole, missing the stuff that would happen to me, and accused me of being in love with them. And that built so much rage inside of me, like when they said that it made me feel like I had to go into like this extreme level of like hatred towards this person so that people would not think that, because I did not want people to think that at all. So I developed my own like rage and hatred for my abuser for several years in fear of people believing that. And it started out like I was pretending to have the fear or the anger, and the anger was there in the fact that somebody would think that somebody would think I was in love with my abuser, but I was projecting that anger like it was towards the abuser. And then it became real after so long of projecting how much you like hate somebody. You start seeing every single tiny negative, and you really will develop hate for that person. And that's what happened. And so I was in therapy, and I was talking to my brother-in-law about a lot of stuff too. And my brother-in-law he'd be alone with me a lot, which is really random. I remember I was in my bedroom in the dark, just like laying down, and I was just kind of trying to breathe. And he came in and shut the door and lied next to me, and he just talked to me. That's all that happened. He just talked to me, but he was saying things like, I can't believe that you've had to endure all of these things that you have, and I can't believe that this happens to people and that it happened to you. And he was like apologizing kind of that that he hadn't noticed anything was happening either. And kind of random, he said that he swore he would never do anything like that to me, and he just wanted me to know that he was like a safe space and a safe person, and that he would never do something like that. And then he did. So he didn't rape me, but he did still sexually assault me. And there's a lot of inappropriate touching over a period of a few days, and there was a lot of like extreme inappropriate touching, like under the clothes, everything, making comments about the way that I feel and physically. And he'd ask me all the time to go like out into the garage that was in their house, because I would stay at their house a lot. He wanted to go out into the garage, and he wanted to like do stuff in the garage, and that nobody would hear us out there because the garage was detached from the house. And it's like I was saying like, no, I'm like watching this movie, like no, like. And I remember like I was anxiously like picking at my ankle, and I had like a scab and it started bleeding. And I asked if he had a Band-Aid, and he's like, oh yeah, we have Band-Aids, but they're in the garage. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll just bleed out. But he convinces me, basically, I almost like kind of like tugging and pulling at me to go out there. And I got like a Band-Aid, and there was more just kind of like trying to take my clothes off and trying to get me to do things. And I'm just saying like, let me go back inside. Like, so there was a lot of like that. So like I said, he didn't like rape me or anything, but there's still a lot of that.
Very clear sexual abuse.
Yeah. And I ended up telling one of my friends about it. I texted him, and I didn't tell him that it was non-consensual at first because I didn't want to like freak him out. I was just telling him like, this is what happened. And I remember my friend texted me back and being like, don't be a home wrecker, because like, if you don't say that it's not consensual, I didn't say that it was consensual. I just said like, this is kind of like what happened. And that I was nervous something more was going to happen. And he was telling me like not to be a home wrecker because he wasn't understanding that I wasn't wanting it. And I think I was just nervous to say that out loud. I think like then it's like admitting abuse kind of.
Yeah.
And at the time I didn't really take it like it was abuse. I thought that, you know, he was just cheating on my sister. I took it as like, oh, he was attracted to me and he would like was cheating on my sister. That's what I was thinking about it. I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm some child, because I saw myself like as an adult and like I was so pretty just like an adult. Like that's kind of like how I perceived myself. So yeah, it took a few years to realize and like fully accept that that's what had happened. He then ended up cheating on my sister with like an 18-year-old and all this stuff, and there was a whole divorce that happened and everything. But you know, between that time my sister found out about everything and she thought that I was making it all up and that I was lying, and so she didn't talk to me for a really long time, over a year actually, because she felt like I was just making stuff up about her husband. And my dad convinced me to press charges because, you know, he was like, what if this is happening to other people? He works with other kids, like, you don't know. And so obviously I wanted to be able to like protect other people if they were also getting hurt, but I was scared. I knew my sister didn't have a job. She was a stay-at-home mom, and that finances were already difficult for them with her husband's income, and that if he were to go to jail, and like where would she go and what would she do, and there are all these things that made me not want to do it. But ultimately my dad did convince me to tell somebody, and that was all like garbage. We all talked to like police, and I did like recorded interviews and all kinds of stuff, and nothing came out of it because it was just all a bunch of he said, she said, and there weren't any witnesses, and he's denying it every step of the way. So he never got in any kind of trouble for it. I mean, he lost his job because his boss was family to us. And so when she found out what had happened and what he had been accused of, she just fired him right away. And I'm still friends with this woman to this day. There was a divorce that happened, and now she's like technically no longer a family member, but to me, like, she always will be, and I love her to bits. But that happened, and then I went, and at that point I was very angry that I at this point had sex more times than I could count, and none of them were ever times that I wanted to or chose to. And it just felt like there was so much of me that had been taken from other people, and like a used and abused kind of feeling. And like I wanted
in control.
Yeah. And I wanted to take back that control. And for me, I was like, you know, my virginity was already gone. Like, what was the point? And, you know, I had already done it so many times. Like, how wrong is it if it's now like I decide like, yeah, I want to do it, but like, and if I'm not hurting anybody else and it's like consensual and I have control over the situation, that was very, very attractive thought to me, because it just gave me control over my body again. And so then I went off and I did things with other people that I chose to do, and I had a boyfriend for like a year where, you know, that was stuff that was going on, and he actually ended up having sex with somebody else while we were dating. So we broke up, obviously. And I remember not wanting to break up, and it had nothing to do with him. It was just because I wanted to have a boyfriend. But that was still too hard, like, because every time I was like around him, I just hated him.
Yeah.
Like, and so I was like, that's not gonna happen. And I remember crying because I didn't have a boyfriend. It was not because of what he did. It wasn't because I wanted him. It wasn't because of anything. It was because I just wanted to have a boyfriend. So weird. And I remember crying and thinking that, and I was realizing that that's why I was crying. And I was like, that is so dumb. I remember thinking that, like, when I was crying. But yeah, I was like sexually harassed a lot, like virtually, with a bunch of people online. And I was like 16, 17. There's a lot of like unsolicited, like nude pictures from like adults as I'm a minor, and people trying to like meet up with me, and like I couldn't even guess a number. There were some girls too. There were some girls but I think the girls were minors too. But the majority of all of the men who would try and do things with me or whatever were all adults. And I ended up moving to Southern California when I was 18, and I was in a singles ward. So with my church, we have like church buildings, and then we have like wards broken up. So it's kind of like there's people who come between 8 and 10, and there's people who come between 9 and 11, and like there's different like times, and then those people who come during those times, they like go at that time every Sunday usually. And they're called wards, and I was in a singles ward, so it's people who are between the ages of 18 and 35.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that, and who are single or like not married, basically, because you could be dating people, but it's for people who are not married. It's not like other wards are typically called like family wards, so it's people who are like married and have kids, or it's not like there's necessarily like specific rules. They just kind of created a ward for people who are not married,
so that you can meet people who are your age that are of the same faith.
Yeah, it's a good way to like meet other people. And I made so many friends in that ward. But there was a guy in that ward who tricked me into thinking we were going on like this group date with other people. And he came to pick me up. 'Cause at this time, like, I had very little money, and it was hard for me to pay for gas for things. And with being in this singles ward, running around and doing activities and fun things all the time. So it was nice if anybody was ever willing to pick me up and I didn't have to like use my gas. I remember that always being really helpful. So yeah, he came to pick me up, and he took me to like this weird place, and there's a whole nother like part of the story that I don't know if I've even told you about, but like it was kind of like this weird like alleyway, and we went through this door, and there were actually other kids there, or I don't know how old they were. They were probably also like around 18 or something, but they were playing Pokemon cards. I think it was Pokemon, but a bunch of them were like playing cards, and he went in, and he was kind of trying to tell me that we were like stopping there for something, to like do something with his friends or get something. I don't know. I remember texting my friend while I was in there, like, you freaking know where I'm at, and this is weird. And then we ended up leaving, and I thought that we were gonna go to this place, but the whole time we were in the car, he just kept like saying he wanted to be my boyfriend, and he kept like holding my hand, and he held my hand, and he took a picture of it and put it on his Snapchat story. And so all these people like thought that we were like holding hands, and we were like together and stuff. And I just kept kind of like uncomfortably laughing and was like, haha, yeah. And I'm very much so a people pleaser, and that's been a really difficult part in all of that.
Especially if you like get anxious about something, and you're like, I don't know, you're anxious with that person. You're kind of put in a position where you're just uncomfortable, so you're kind of just like agreeing with what's happening.
Yeah, but yeah, so ultimately he ended up forcing himself on me, and I never said the words no, but I do specifically remember a time where I tried to pull away and he forcefully brought me back, and then I tried to pull away again, and it was like a very, very strong, like I almost like hurt me, forced me back. And in my head at that point, I was like, all right, this is just gonna happen. Like I felt like there was just like nothing that I could do at that point. And I ended up having like handprint marks, like bruised on my neck. And people thought that I had like some hickeys. And I actually might have. I don't know. I can't remember that specifically, but I know that there were parts where, like, if you looked at it, some of the parts where it like looked like they were hickeys, they were like bruised marks from him like grabbing my throat, because he's holding my throat down. He's very like aggressive. And I don't think to him, like, not giving him any kind of like excuse by any means, but I don't think to him he was like, oh, I'm gonna like rape this person. It felt more like he was like attracted to me and like wanted me to like participate, and is like into very like forceful, aggressive sexual behaviors. That's like what he likes.
Well, whether that was his intention or not, that's what it was. I mean,
yeah,
it was forceful rape.
Yeah. And so I have like a note in my notes app on my phone from way back then where I was like feeling so guilty, and I thought it was like all my fault, and like I thought I was going to get in trouble at the church again, and all of these things. And I remember going to my bishop of the church to tell him about what had happened, and he was like, you were assaulted. And more girls from the ward started coming out after that, saying that he had done the same thing to them. So he got kicked out of the ward and was no longer like welcome back. I don't know. I think I might have like seen that he was back in the ward like after I was gone or something. I don't remember, unless he was just like participating in an activity that and they were allowing him. I don't know, but that happened with him. And then there's another situation with a guy that I met online, and I thought that I really liked him a lot, and I ended up driving like 6 hours to see him one weekend. And it was like the longest I've ever driven by myself, like all the way through. And he was just like a completely different person in real life. And he was kind of like psychotic. And like he talked to me about how he threw boiling water on his mom because he was mad at her. And then I was like scared when he said that to me. And there's a lot of details of the story that I don't really remember that much, but I remember him like, I remember being like fine with like kissing, but I didn't want to do anything more, and he did. And it kind of turned into another thing of where I just like, just shut down and let things happen. And so even like to this day, I don't necessarily know if I could even consider that like that I was like assaulted, or if I just like it was kind of like I just didn't really want to, but I just did it anyway kind of thing. Like I don't really know how I would classify that situation, but I know for sure I like did not want to. And TMI, I was on my period. So like I did not want to. That was like, because that was something I had never, even through everything that had happened in like the previous years, I never ever had anything happen like while on my period. And I was like, no freaking way. Like, and so, you know, maybe it was, you know, more forceful now that I'm like talking it out, just because it's like, I remember like, I don't want to do that. Like, so that happened. And then wasn't too long after that where I actually met Colin online as well. And I had one of my like biggest moments of my life, like in top 5 for sure of the times that I've like felt the spirit telling me to do something so strongly, where it was like no question. And I knew that I needed to move to Utah. I was living in Southern California at the time. And I basically dropped everything within a week and I moved here. My aunt said I could rent a bedroom in her house from her for like $250 a month or something. And, you know, I came right away, and the first day that I moved in, Colin came over and we were together like almost every single day until we were married, I think.
Yeah, it was super like natural, like once, because we had already been like FaceTiming a bunch and just talking very regularly, and she actually already like told me about all of this abuse and stuff over like a FaceTime call. After we'd been, you know, talking for, I don't know, probably only like a few weeks. And I remember like she was feeling like super nervous and scared to like share these things with me. And yeah, I just remember feeling like the overwhelming emotion was just like this like deep like sorrow or like empathy that like she had to go through these things her whole life, especially from such a young age. And like, again, like this was not something that I really knew a lot about because I hadn't really heard about this happening to anybody in my life growing up. Like I didn't really know any stories of you know, child sexual abuse like that, and for it to happen so many different times in her life, it just was like a very like overwhelming feeling of just like, I cannot believe that like she's went through all of this, and it is so sad and scary. And then like she said, like when she moved here, she moved in with her aunt who was, you know, 5 minutes around the corner. We lived in the same city, and so we just like, you know, I'd get off work and I'd go over there and we'd hang out, or she'd come over to my house and we'd hang out, and you know, things just like moved really quickly. And
then just do so much so fast.
So then, you know, after like knowing all these things from her and hearing these stories, it just like started forming this like new perspective in my own head. And then, you know, you fast forward a year or two later and we're having kids of our own, and it just gives you that perspective of like some of the things that happened to her were people in her life that she thought she could trust, people in her life that her parents thought that they could trust. And so it just gives you this new perspective as a parent that like you really can never be too careful with your kids when it comes to this stuff. And in a lot of ways, this stuff is sort of like a cycle. You know, a lot of people that get abused, like the person that was abusing her for so many years was abused, like it's a cycle. It happens to you and then you end up doing these things to other people. And it just is one of those things where it's like, you just have to be over the top careful with your kids and not put them in a situation where something like that can happen, even if it means they're not going to be able to do some of the fun things that other kids are doing. You may have to err on the side of caution, even if it does seem like something super innocent or you know, not like a threatening situation. Like maybe they want to have a sleepover with some friends or something. And realistically, like putting your kids in a situation where, you know, they're now not in a place where you can supervise or protect them. It doesn't mean you have to like, you know, helicopter right over their shoulder all the time, but you have to be extra careful with the situations you're putting them in where there isn't a way for you to know that they're okay.
I do want to say one thing with you mentioning like the sleepover. I also had experiences where through the things that were happening to me that I was learning from another person that was like my initial abuser. I would have sleepovers with cousins and I would be like, hey, look at what so-and-so showed me. Like, isn't this kind of funny?
Yeah.
Isn't this funny? And I would show my cousins that are my age. And to this day, never, ever have we talked about it because that's weird. And I just hope in my heart that they thought it was a dream. But unless they watch this and they're like, oh my gosh, I remember that. But like, I would, as a kid and they're my same age, I would be like, hey, look at what so-and-so showed me. Like, this is so funny. Like, isn't this funny? And so I showed other people. I did it with other kids and nothing, like there was, when you're that little, like there's only so much that you can do. Like I wasn't like having sex with other people, like choosing to, but I was like showing them like, if you can look at this, or like, isn't it funny if you like touch right here or something, or your mouth and just like, I know this is like so like kind of TMI, and I'm throwing myself under the bus, but it's like, it is a cycle. Like, even for me, like, I obviously, my intentions were not ill. It was like, you know, I was shown something, I thought it was kind of funny, but I also knew that it was supposed to be like a secret.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I've mentioned in a previous video too, like where I talked about, you know, why we don't teach that Santa Claus is real in our house. And I'll link that video. You can watch it up here somewhere, one of the cards. But I talk about how there's will not be secrets in this house. There are not lies. Like, if anybody ever tells our kids like, hey, I have a secret for you, don't listen to them.
Especially, especially like even in our own household, like our kids will not have secrets that I'm telling them, hey, keep this a secret from mom, and vice versa, or between each other, like that secrets are not okay. It doesn't mean you can't trust the people in your house. You can still have conversations where you can that are private, that you can trust them, but like things where people are like, you can't tell other people this thing. It's just not going to be an appropriate way. Like, if the kids are telling or if I'm telling the kids something, like it's something that they need to be able to also speak with their mom about. And so
and that's different from like a surprise. So if someone's going to be like throwing a surprise party, like we're throwing a surprise party for dad, we could tell the kids it's not a secret that we're having the party, but it's going to be a surprise. So we're going to withhold the information for a short period of time, but he's going to find out like on Friday or something, you know? And so there's definitely going to be an explanation in the difference between surprises and secrets. But if anybody ever tells them a secret, they can come tell mom and dad. And I don't care if they think it's a tiny little thing or if it's a huge thing. If you think you're going to get in trouble from anything, I will swear to them they will never, ever, ever, ever be in trouble for telling me a secret. I want them to tell me like what somebody tells them. And they'll never be alone with anybody. They will not share bedrooms. Even now, they're 2 and 3 years old and they don't share a bedroom because we will give them baths together still while they're this little, but we're always in there. And you could already notice like they both individually are already like curious about their own parts, and they'll like touch their own parts and like, what's that? And I've seen one of them see the other one and go to like grab because they're like, what's that? I've seen that happen. And so it's like already to the point where like, you know, when we're in there, we're like really in there, and that doesn't happen all the time. It just like has happened. Usually they just kind of play separately and they're on opposite sides of the tub and they play with their toys. So that's why I'm like comfortable, but we don't leave them. I mean, you should never leave your kids alone in the bathtub ever, but they're already going to be getting close to an age where it's no longer going to be appropriate for them to be in there together. Especially with Kinley, like as she gets closer to 4, like everybody has memories of being 4 years old. Like once those memories can start to like really stay long term, like then that's no longer appropriate. But so we have that. And then something that a lot of people don't know that I have seen a reoccurring like reaction from people of shock is that playing doctor is like the number one way for sexual things to start happening with kids. And so like if you could look it up online, look up like kids playing doctor and sexual abuse and all kinds of stuff. Like it is very, very common because they check out your body and all kinds of things, and it's a very easy way for an adult to target a kid too. Like, you know, if you have your kids over at someone's house and they're being babysat, like you never know if like one of the parents or like if they have a son or whatever who's older, anybody, it could be boys or girls, but who's like, oh, let's play doctor together. And so our kids won't be allowed to play doctor on each other. They can play doctor on a stuffed animal. Like they can both be doctors and they can play like their stuffed animals can be their patients and stuff, but another person is not that. And I don't leave kids alone to play by themselves ever. Like there will always be an open door. Like the kids have their doors shut, and when they are alone in their rooms like sleeping, their doors are shut. And we actually have locks on the outside, which is pretty controversial, but we have cameras in there and we check them very regularly. We don't let them in there screaming, trying to get out kind
Yeah.
of thing. That's not how it works. We have it there for safety reasons because they can be very, very sneaky. They know how to open doors, so they could just come out in the middle of the night, and they know how to like climb up onto counters, and they could get
There's
knives, and they've broken glass before from climbing up on counters and getting into cabinets and throwing stuff down. Like,
our daughter Kinley is especially curious and also autistic, so it's very hard for us to communicate with her what is okay and what's not okay for her to get into. Like, we can tell her very adamantly, like, no, we do not do this, we do not get into whatever this is, it's not safe, you could get hurt. And she'll get really, really sad and worked up, and then 5 minutes later, she's magnetized right back to whatever it was. So it's going to take some time for her to, you know, through therapy, like learn to actually understand what we're saying to her and be able to apply it.
Yeah. So it's something that she struggles with big time is not understanding safety. Like, she doesn't see danger.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
And so those locks are on there for that reason. It's a safety reason for if we are asleep, we know that she's safe in her room. And, you know, we have, like I said, we have video and audio cameras that we have in there. So we can always, and their room's right down the hall from us. So even in the middle of the night, we've had times where one of them starts crying, we could hear them from down the hall. Like, and so it's not,
we're not in a very big house.
Yeah, and we're not like trapping them in there, and because a lot of people are like, you lock your kids in there, like when they're trying to get out, and it's like, but also fire safety, by the way, you should always, always, always sleep with your bedroom door closed for fire safety reasons. And even though you're like, okay, everybody in the house is going to be asleep, what the heck, like, I don't even know. We left a candle burning last night that we totally forgot about, and sometimes those things could start flicking up, and if it flicked up and it got like a paper towel or hand towel and it started getting onto other things, like stuff like that can happen. You forget about, and it can even be caused by a next door neighbor. Yeah, it's obviously not something that's happening to everybody all the time, but yeah, you know, we have actually had our house and stuff catch on fire in my life growing up too. We were also almost kidnapped. That's a whole other story. I need to write a book. That's why I have a YouTube channel, you know. But so if you don't know about that, I really do suggest getting online and looking up how much safer it is to sleep with your bedroom door shut. Your bedroom door can withhold smoke and fire from getting into your room because smoke rises, so it's not going to come underneath your door, hopefully, unless it's like a ginormous fire. But if there's a fire and it gets to your door is going to give you so much time to try and escape from the house. And so even with our kids' doors being shut too, it's the same thing for their rooms. Is if they're asleep in their room and we're also asleep and there's a fire, those shut doors are going to keep all of us individually safer for a much longer period of time. And at that point, you'd hope that the fire alarm or smoke alarms are going off and we're getting kids out of the house. And then they teach you how to feel the door before you open it to make sure, you know, if it feels warm, your door could potentially have fire right out there. And then there's other measures that you can go about with, you know, needing to get your kids and stuff like that. But that's a whole different thing. I'm talking about fire safety, but I just want my kids' door shut. I don't want them to get out when they need to be in there sleeping. And so there's a lot of safety reasons as to why we have it there. But I also like that with it being locked that they can't like sneak into each other's rooms in the middle of the night. Not that that's something that I think they're really at an age where I would need to worry about that, but you really don't know, because with stuff with me, it started when I was 2 years old. That's Hudson's age. And it was with a 6-year-old. And like our kids have cousins who are that age. And you don't know if like someone, like and they're in school, and you don't know if stuff happens to them at school. And then they want to show, you know, their cousins when they're little. Like it's really scary how many different ways it could go about. Like you never ever want to like assume that those things are happening or can happen, but it's so easy.
Yeah, you want to assume that your kids and your your nieces and nephews. You want all kids. You want to be able to assume that all kids are safe and are not experiencing these things. But they are real. There are countless stories of these horrible things happening. So it's not necessarily that you have to just be this overbearing parent that can't allow their kids to do anything. It's more like, I need to make sure that I'm thoroughly thinking through, is my kid going to be in a position where they're vulnerable to somebody that may try and take advantage of them and do something inappropriate with them? And so it's like, once you like start putting the things, you kind of put that filter in your brain and you start like thinking through the situations, you'll start to realize like there's a lot of situations where your child may not be under your supervision and something could happen, and it's just not worth the risk, in my opinion. And so
and there's a lot that's really, really hard for me to think about as our kids start getting older. And obviously you can't go to school with them, you can't do certain things with them, and there's going to be plenty of opportunities where stuff can happen, and you just have to like hope that you are teaching your children like in the best possible way that you can on when certain things happen. And like when they start potty training, that the only people that help you go potty is mommy and daddy and anybody that we might allow them. Like if they're visiting their Nana's house, his mom, like that Nana can help you go potty if you need, like when we go, like, but your uncles and everybody, like, not that I would ever assume that they would do anything. I never feel like they would, but they don't help our kids go potty in the bathroom. So it's like,
teach your kids like real language when it comes to like their anatomy. Teach them from a young age, what things are and what they're for and what's appropriate and what's not.
And it's normal for us to like look at our bodies and be curious about things, and it's normal for like I'm not gonna tell my kids that they're in trouble for like touching their own bodies when they're learning about their anatomy and what does this do, and this is like, I think it's important to know your body, and I never want to give them like that stigma of like needing to be ashamed of your body, or like you cannot touch this, you cannot touch this. Like your own body is your own. I think you should love every bit of your body. That's
very, very important to teach them from a young age, that their body is theirs and they have full like basically ownership and autonomy of their own body. And so they can understand that like if somebody else tries to do something but they don't want to, like it's their body, it's their choice, they can hopefully then understand that if something does happen, hopefully we can instill in them that like that's not appropriate, it's not okay, it needs to be like told to us so that can be handled and be prevented from happening again.
And no will be like very, very important. I want to teach my kids that like if you don't like something that's happening, and you say no or stop or anything of that sort, mom and dad will respect that, and we will put our hands up and back up. Like they need to learn that when they say no or stop, that those words are powerful and everybody should respect it. And get your hands off of somebody who says that. And like that will be the same when they're playing together. If they start like fighting and they're like, stop, get off me, that's going to be extremely important that whoever said that, the other person needs to get off right now. Like, and if we're roughhousing and they don't like it and they say stop, like you put them down and you will respect those words. I want them to know that those words are to be respected. And if they say those things and people are not respecting their boundaries, like, again, that's something where they come talk to us, and like, they will never, ever be in trouble for coming to us about anything. I don't care if they made any kind of mistake. They will not ever be in trouble coming to us to talk about it.
And then the last thing that I would probably touch on is even the situations you put your kids in where they're having conversations with other people. What is appropriate for certain people to talk to you about?
Yeah.
If making sure that your kids understand that like nobody should be asking you about
your body,
you and your body. And so like one of the things that comes to mind is in our church, a lot of times for certain things or milestones or events in your life in the church, you meet with church leadership. Usually it's like a local ward bishop or a stake president, and they'll ask you questions about like, how are you living the gospel, that kind of thing. Well, I want to make sure that my kids know that in those scenarios, like the questions that are supposed to be asked are supposed to be very direct, very specific.
Yeah.
And
they have like papers that have questions listed out, and we want to make sure like I could even see us talking to a bishop or a stake president directly and like, asking to like respect, just bullet point asking these questions, because we have had experiences ourselves and we know several people who have had experiences where the interviewer might have asked is it interviewer or interviewee?
The interviewer, the person asking the questions.
Yeah. They go beyond the question. Like, do you do this? Have you ever done something like this before? And like, that can get really inappropriate and really uncomfortable fast, where it's like,
regardless of what their intentions are, right? Like if they come up to some questions about, let's say they're asking about your obedience to the law of chastity. Well, they're supposed to ask, do you obey the law of chastity? If it goes beyond that and they start asking about like specific acts or if you've done certain things, it's not appropriate. And so until a certain age, one of us or both of us will be in the room during those interviews. And I know a lot of people that do those interviews, a lot of people in these church leadership positions don't necessarily agree with that, because then they're worried that the kid won't feel comfortable talking about things with their parents there. And I understand that perspective, but to me, again, it's one of those things where you kind of have to mitigate the risk. Like, to me, no matter who that person is that's doing that interview in that room, no matter how much I trust them as a person, I'm not going to put my child in a position where something could potentially happen with them.
Yeah. And I truly hope that our kids never don't want to come to us for something, and I'm sure that that's something that like every parent wants, but I really, really want to strive for that. Like, I don't want them to ever feel that they're going to get in trouble for coming to us about anything. Like,
so then you can build that trust with them, and then if they do have something that like they really are struggling with, or they're really like they're struggling with anything. They could be struggling with their faith in the church. They could be struggling with something that's happening at school, or they're struggling with an addiction to pornography, or they're struggling with something that's like a very real. You want them to understand that like they can come to you for help.
Like, even if they did something like intentionally wrong, like if they intentionally were mean to someone at school and they did something mean, they like pushed somebody or they called someone a name or whatever, if they're coming to us about it, that is such a respectable thing, in my opinion. And I wouldn't get them in trouble for doing that, for coming to me. Obviously, there's going to be a conversation.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about why that's not okay. But it's not like, how dare you, and I'm going to shame you and put you down, and then you can't hang out with friends anymore, and no video games for a week. Like, none of that is connected. It doesn't make sense. If they're coming to you, like, let them, they're going to have natural consequences of now that person who was hurt by them is not going to like them, is probably going to like pull back and not have trust towards them. And if they ever want to be their friend again, it's going to be really hard for that person. And those are natural consequences. And we'll talk to them about those things. But like I said, even if they intentionally did something wrong, if they're coming to us, they will not be in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, and that's just how I feel. And when I had parents in a room with me while I was interviewing for church related things, I always felt so much more comfortable if my mom was in there or my dad. If I was ever alone, I was uncomfortable. And that could be because I had already been experiencing those things, like, being alone with men and having these things happen to me. I would almost always have a thought in the back of my head, like, I wonder if they do this, at home too.
Yeah.
Or I wonder if they would ever do this to me, like with me being in here.
Yeah, and I've had questions where I was asked things in those interviews where I knew the questions that were supposed to be asked word for word, and that in the handbook it says they're supposed to only be asked this way and in order. And so I, in my own head, would instantly have pushback if they asked anything else, and I would just reply with no or whatever just to get them to move on. And so I just want my kids, I don't want my kids to think that like they can't have their own thoughts and they can't have an open dialogue with the church leader. That's not what it's about. It's just about making sure that they understand what appropriate boundaries are so that they can, you know, stand up for themselves, but also understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate for another adult to be talking to them about.
Yeah. I feel like we basically covered everything. I can't think of anything else at the moment.
Yeah.
I really just had like a bullet point list in my mind, and we went over everything, and you also brought up a lot more that I was really glad you brought up because I hadn't really thought about it. But I really do think, like, I will say actually one thing I did want to mention about like my whole healing process, because I have had people be like, how the heck are you standing today, like with all of those things? Which honestly, it feels really good when people say that, because it really is like a compliment, like you're doing so good is kind of like what they're saying. And really just like I truly believe about like mindset, and the way that you look at the situation will affect your life in drastic ways. And I really just took all of those things that happened and I learned from them, and they made me stronger. I wouldn't take back any of the things that happened because I've learned so much through all of those experiences. And I feel like as a parent, with all of these things that we know now, I think that that's not super common knowledge, honestly. And I'm so thankful that I know those things and that I can help protect my children in that way. I'm so thankful for, you know, the opportunity to be able to tell my story and help other people who have also experienced these things. Like, if you're experiencing these things and you haven't told anybody, like, tell somebody, like, tell me, like, I will help anybody. If anybody messages me, like, follow my Instagram and DM me on Instagram, like, talk to me, like, I want to directly help anybody who needs it. Or if you just want to like talk and rant and tell me about your experience or something, like, I also have Marco Polo, you could just like chat with me on there. I would talk to anybody, like, and I just like, I want people to know that like through any experience that we have in this life, we choose our ultimate outcome. We choose our mental health and our emotions and our reactions. That is all up to us. Obviously, our bodies are going to naturally react in a certain way in immediate like circumstances, and that's normal and that's healthy. What's not healthy is wallowing.
Yeah.
And you can choose to be angry and hold a grudge your entire life and just live feeling horrible all the time. Or you can grow up and you can say, I'm not going to let this ruin my life. Like, I learned so much and I've gone through so much, and look at me, like, look at what I can do. Like, look at what I know, and none of this is going to stop me. And like, my mom would always tell me, like, the best thing you can do for anybody who's ever hurt you is to be successful. Like, live your life happy and do things that make you happy. And that's the best way to get back at people. Not that I want to get back at anybody, because I have like great relationships with a lot of these people to this day.
Trying to get back at life.
Well, I have great relationships with my original abuser. All the other people after that, I do not. So feel free to seek out and try and figure out who they are, because my original abuser, like, it feels really weird calling him that, because that's not how I see him. That's not how I refer to him on a normal basis. I'm just trying to protect his identity, like, through telling my story, but I love that person to this day. Like, completely different person, like, changed for the better and is amazing. And
again, was a kid also when all these things happened.
Yeah, I was also a kid. So yeah, that's different. But yeah, the best thing that I can do is choose to be happy.
Choose to forgive.
Choose to forgive and not hold on to that, and just have love in your heart. And as hard as it is, you can do that. People don't realize how powerful our minds are, and you can choose how to feel about anyone and anything, and your body will do whatever you want it to do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're choosing to have that negativity, you will just have it, and it will, there's ripple effects either way. So I choose to be happy, and I choose to think about what's happening in my life today and what do I have today. And I'm so blessed. We have a home that we own and we love it. It's so beautiful, brand new when we bought it, when we were moving in. And I have the most amazing husband in the whole world who I love so much, and I know how much he loves me and is protective over me and our family, and I know what his intentions are for all of us. And I had 2 beautiful, healthy children, and it's like, how much more difficult and like unnecessary could my life be if I'm just sitting here like, like
sorrow,
I just like
and anger and
this person and I'm like, I feel this way because I was abused, and just like using it as an excuse for every little thing. And that's not what I want. I want to use it for good.
And obviously people will need time to get over things that happen to them, and that's totally normal to go through times where, like,
of course,
I mean, obviously, like, having never been a victim, like, I don't necessarily understand that, but
you've experienced depression pretty severe.
Yeah, but like, just from that perspective, just like understanding like what you went through, like, obviously there's a time where you have to face the things that happened and, be honest with them. But at a certain point, like, you have to choose, like, am I going to let this continue to make me feel the way that I feel, or am I going to, like, kind of choose the way that I'm going to feel for the rest of my life? And so to your credit, like, you're very good at that. You're very good at taking the positive in situations and just absolutely running with it and just saying, you know what, like, this is the situation we're in. Let's just be positive with it. We'll make it through it. And just is a very, like, strong quality of yours. And I think the more that you try and be that way, whether it's a natural thing to you or not, the more that you try and be that way and just try and accept the world that you're in and be positive about the world you're in, then it's not necessarily the life's going to be easier, but it's going to be a lot more enjoyable through life.
Yeah. And that's the absolute biggest thing for me. The whole takeaway over all of it is I wouldn't be able to do any of it without my faith and my relationship that I have built with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ. Like, and you can, take that however you want, but that's truly how I get up every single day, is because of that and that relationship. And I communicate through prayer, and I do meditation. And for me, meditation is just a very, very special way to fully connect with, like, the Holy Spirit and, like, my own personal spirit, and, like, getting out of the earth around me and just fully being in tune with myself and my spirit. And it's like I'm putting myself in a position where I can listen and feel for guidance and direction. That's what meditation does for me. That's what prayer does for me. And through those things, I take the information that I'm receiving through that, and I do whatever it is that I need to do. And through that connection building that I have had, I have so much peace about everything. Like, our finances right now are crazy. Like, I'll just say it. I make $15 an hour, and he lost his job, and so he has nothing. and we have a almost $3,000 mortgage and all kinds of bills in our phones and internet and utilities and all kinds of stuff. And every single penny that I make that we get together doesn't cover the mortgage alone. And that's really vulnerable to talk about, that our finances are that bad. But like, we have a home.
Yeah.
And
things will work out. Like,
yeah,
you keep that positive, things will work out.
It's like through the prayer that I have been having on a daily basis, it's like, I know, like I could hear the words just like whispered into my ears, just everything's gonna be okay, and you are so fine. Like, just continue doing what you're doing. Just, live your life, live your day, like make your schedules and do your yoga and make sure you're studying your scriptures and do your gratitude journal and put some like work towards like your YouTube channel. Like, do the things that make you happy. Continue living like your day and doing something productive every day so that you're not like falling behind and getting like lazy or falling into any kind of depression. But just keep doing that and something's coming. And I'll tell you, I haven't even said this to you, but in my gratitude journal the last few days, every single time I've been writing, I've just had this overwhelming feeling that something big is gonna happen. And I've been writing that down the last like 3 or 4 days in my journal. I've been saying, I can feel that something really big is about to happen for my family. And I don't know what it is, but I've been saying that. And so I don't know if it's finances or I feel like it's good.
Yeah.
I feel like something good and really big is about to happen. And I've been writing that down and I don't know what it is, like I said, but I just have like the full peace and comfort because of that relationship that I've built. And kind of like he was saying before, sometimes those kinds of like emotions and the things that you have to say to try and like project that positivity, sometimes it can feel fake. Sometimes you can not feel that at all. But if you try your best to like verbally only say positive things, don't think of the negative thing first. Think of something positive to say and just try to do that as much as you possibly can. Even if you're thinking of 10 negatives, and if you could find one positive, only say that one. Like, don't say all the other things. That it really is life-changing, and it really will change you, and it will eventually, like when you do it on a regular basis, it will truly become who you are. You will become a positive, peaceful person.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm living proof of that. I feel like for the most part, that's who I am these days. Because that's just what I've been doing. Not to say that I don't have bad days or bad emotions, that happens, but overall I feel like I'm a very happy, positive person who is at peace, and I'm driven and ambitious, and I know that I can achieve big things. I just learned a lot from everything that I've experienced in my life. And again, like if you're experiencing some of these things and you're in a very like negative state of mind, like something I didn't mention is, I did experience depression in high school where I tried to end it all. I tried to end my life. And so I definitely understand what it's like too, to like be in the deepest, darkest like state of depression. And so I don't want to like shame anybody. I'm not like, be happy, you can choose to be happy. Like, you're like, okay, well, let me just
flip that.
Yeah, I know that it's not easy. And actually, I will say, coming out of that like deepest, darkest depression I've ever had to this day is probably one of the hardest things I've ever experienced in my life. It's not easy, but it is important to know that we do have that power. So, and I couldn't do it without God. Could not. Do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, hopefully you like this hour, 45-minute video of kind of a podcast style kind of thing. But if you did like it, I hope that you will subscribe and like this video and leave a comment below if you've ever experienced anything like this, or if you know anybody who has experienced these things, or if you have any questions. I'd love to hear like other people's stories and like start a little like
ideas and perspectives.
Yeah, start a little something in the comment section. Follow me on Instagram too. I'm posting there a lot more these days, and I answer a lot of like DMs and messages on there. So if you ever want to like send me a direct message, I try and get back to everybody on there. But yeah, hopefully you like this video. Go watch more of my videos if you have time. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.